There's no such thing as a quiet weekend in 2020, that's for sure. We have a bunch of big stories to get through, from missing children found, some clarity on a CDC report that's getting a lot of attention, and an update on a really important story you're going to hear a lot about this week. So let's get started. Just word to the wise, these are kind of heavy stories. So if you have young ears in the room, just want to give you a heads up. That's one of my pet peeves about the news, going from weather to scandal in just a few seconds. You don't get to catch up, so I just want to let you know this. But these are important stories, and I want to make sure that we share them together. First thing to note is that on Friday evening, the U.S. Marshals sent out a press release on an investigation that has taken place over the last several weeks called Operation Not Forgotten. This is the first time we're hearing about it publicly. And the U.S. Marshals said it led to the successful rescue of 26 missing children and the successful safe location of another 13. So 39 children overall, ages ranging between 3 and 17. The investigation also led to 9 arrests. You might ask me, well, what's the difference between rescuing the children and safely locating the others? It's a great question. I've asked U.S. Marshals for some clarity on that. I hope to get that for you. Allison, you were asking me, well, how are the U.S. Marshals involved in missing children? And it enabled me to look into the U.S. Marshals a little bit further. The U.S. Marshals are the first federal law enforcement agency in U.S. history. It dates back to President Washington, who appointed 13 federal marshals. And over the years, the U.S. Marshals have been known really as manhunters, like the guys that go after the most wanted. In recent years, with recent legislation, the U.S. Marshals have been empowered to become more involved in missing children cases. It's a collaborative effort often. So in this particular case, U.S. Marshals worked with local law enforcement in the state of Georgia where this took place, as well as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I know child trafficking is a really important issue to you. I am working on a larger report on that issue overall in America. We know that that takes place in 50 states, all 50 states. So it's an issue I know you're passionate about, and I want to actually deliver to you some more information on that topic. The question of how we keep our families safe is a big theme for 2020, and it's one we're actually seeing repeatedly when we're talking about COVID-19. Every week, the CDC puts out new information about what we know about COVID cases in America, and they break it down in different ways. The recent report raised some eyebrows in the way that it was portrayed, and I want to read through it. Some of you have likely seen this on social media, some of you have not. If you haven't, it's okay. This is a little bit in the weeds, but it's important to know this, because sometimes I think we think that all data is 100% precise. And unfortunately, what we're learning with COVID-19, data is a living and breathing thing very much like the rest of us. So this is really important to know. This is a discussion about comorbidities. Comorbidities are pre-existing conditions. These are a condition that someone can have, like heart disease, for example, that could put them at a higher risk for COVID. But in this particular case, in this particular data set, the CDC was looking at the types of health conditions and contributing causes to someone who eventually died of COVID-19. And here's the line that got all the attention. For 6% of the deaths, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned. Wait, what? 6% of the deaths, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned. And this is why it caused all these questions. What do you mean? We're in the middle of a pandemic? Only 6% of the deaths are only attributed to COVID-19? How could that be? It has to do with the way that the data is being collected together. The CDC goes on to say 2.6 additional conditions or causes per death on average for everyone who dies of COVID. So let me explain this. The CDC is putting together both the cause of death and pre-existing conditions into one pot. It's not a great way to do it. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to draw a lot of conclusions from the data when it's all put into one pot. Let me give you an example. When someone has the flu, let's say someone gets the flu, really bad case, develops pneumonia, gets really sick, then their heart stops, they unfortunately die. Their causes of death can be listed in a couple ways: cardiac arrest, pneumonia, and the flu. Same thing can happen with COVID. Someone gets really sick of COVID, they develop pneumonia, pneumonia-like illness, eventually their heart stops. Okay, cardiac arrest, pneumonia, COVID, all could be listed as their cause of death. Depends on the doctor, by the way. I reached out to Dr. Daria. She works in the ER. She knows how this works. It really depends, she says, depending on the doctor, about how specifically they're labeling someone's cause of death. The way that she described it, I think, was really good. She said these are the pathways that someone is in that can eventually lead to their unfortunate death. And so with COVID-19, the way that the CDC is looking at these different causes, they're lumping them in with other things. So for example, let's say someone has really bad heart disease, has had it for years. They get COVID, they develop pneumonia, and they go into cardiac arrest. Well, wait a minute, what actually caused their death? Was it COVID that led to the cardiac arrest, but they had this pre-existing condition? So how do we sort through that? What came first? What's actually the most important? You can't tell that from this particular data set. That's problematic. It's one of the reasons why I reached out to the CDC and said, can you help me with this? Because this is really important. To give the impression that COVID-19 is really only responsible for 6% of the death is not accurate as well. It's that COVID-19 can lead to a bunch of other conditions, like you developing a pneumonia-like illness that can eventually lead to your death. So the order of these things is important. We can't tell that from this data. It's all lumped together. Big takeaway is be very careful about saying only 6% of the people that we count as dying from COVID have actually died from that. That's not accurate. That's not what this data is saying. At the same time, the data is very difficult to draw conclusions out from. Here's a couple of things I think it is important to know just from the latest data, and I just worked through some of the numbers. 1 out of 5 people who have died of COVID-19 in America thus far were in nursing homes or in hospice. More than half of the people who have died, 164,000 was the latest count from the CDC. It has gone up since then. More than half are over the age of 75. Those that are under the age of 24 make up less than 1% of all the deaths. Under 24, less than 1%. 55 and younger make up about 8% of all the deaths. So that gives you a little bit of an idea. Big takeaway, age, pre-existing conditions make you more vulnerable for COVID. They also make you a lot more vulnerable for other things like the flu, for example. So just know I'm on this. I hope that's helpful. I know it's not easy. It isn't easy. That's a fact. But just know that in this particular data where everyone's looking at this one line from the CDC, they're throwing in pre-existing conditions and causes of death together, and it's causing some confusion, okay? Questions about that, let me know. Okay, final thing. This has to do with Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the shooting of Jacob Blake. Up until this point, we have not heard the perspective of the police officers as to what happened. Today, we learned their point of view. They describe responding to a scene where they knew that they were looking for Jacob Blake, who apparently had taken the keys to someone's car. They describe a chaotic scene that actually ended up getting violent. They also describe Jacob Blake having a knife. I encourage you to read their point of view from our website. It is one piece of the puzzle. It is not the full puzzle, but it is an important piece that we haven't heard so far. Now, investigators are going to take this all in and decide whether or not the police will be charged with a crime related to the shooting of Jacob Blake. We don't know that yet. And right now, we don't know how long that could potentially take. But at least we have this one perspective. We'll have to add in Jacob Blake's perspective as well as witnesses on the scene. We have a little bit of that, but the picture now is emerging. And I encourage you to check it out for yourself. The president is expected to head to Kenosha, Wisconsin this week. That has been controversial, as have most things been over the last several weeks about how what the local and state and federal politicians are handling this issue of violence, tension over race, police enforcement, as we've talked about many of these different layered themes that are really making up some of our big news stories. All right, guys, it was kind of a heavy lift today, but we'll be looking forward to more stories that can hopefully help illuminate your life. If you'd like us to look into anything specific, always let us know in the comment section, direct message us, hello@smarternews.com. We always love hearing from you. All right, guys, have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon on Smarter News.